Geeks and Geekettes. It's the 19th episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. Who knew it would go on this long? Who knew you would have so many questions? Who knew I would have so many answers? Hey, as always, if you can share these on social media, keep the audience growing, I would appreciate it because it makes it worth doing these. I love talking to all of you. I love answering your questions, but the more people that I have watching and listening, obviously the better. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? I mean, this is an outreach from a comic book creator to his public. So anyway, let's get to the first question. Stop wasting time with me blathering on. Dr. Cyborg Luncheon Meat, he's back. He says, I'm a huge fan of jungle-themed comics, but they seem to have lost their relevance and have become a lost art. What are some of your favorite jungle titles and stories? Well, let's go to the jungle. Well, obviously Tarzan. Tarzan is the not only the Lord of the Beasts, the King of the Apes, and all the rest of it, but he's the number one inspiration for most jungle genre stories. And my favorite Tarzan stories are by Russ Manning, Gold Key and Dell. Russ Manning also did the newspaper strip, the dailies and the Sundays, and he wrote and drew the strips, and they're really terrific extensions of what Edgar Rice Burroughs had laid down, and full of all the tricks and tropes and plot lines that Edgar Rice Burroughs loved to use. Manning was obviously a student of Tarzan, and just does a terrific job, in addition to being one of comics' most awesome draftsmen of all time. Joe Kubert's incredible run on DC at DC Comics is probably the most faithful adaptation of the Tarzan novels ever done. Joe obviously had a lot of passion for this project. It shows in every single panel and every single page, and I imagine this was quite a good seller for DC. It had quite a run. My understanding is the license was quite expensive, so there wasn't a lot of profitability here for DC. I do not care for Marvel's run. I think they wasted John Buscema on a bunch of pretty much lackluster stories that were too wordy. Didn't let John loose on Tarzan the way Joe Kubert had been unleashed. So I'm not a big fan of the Marvel run. Yes, the artwork is very nice, but the stories are kind of tepid. Bern Hogarth, I know he didn't draw for the comic books, he drew for the comic strips, but Bern Hogarth is a favorite, a very muscular Tarzan, very brutal, lots of really violent action in these stories. Bern Hogarth just seems to embrace the savagery of Edgar Rice Burroughs' work. And over the years, I've become more and more enamored of Jesse Marsh's run on Tarzan. A lot of people find it kind of quiet and boring and all the rest, but I really enjoy the stories, mostly written by Gaylord Dubois, and it was a very long, incredibly successful run. And for years, I didn't look at them. And at first glance, it looked very uninteresting to me. Jesse Marsh's work didn't engage me. But I read so many artists who said they were influenced by him, including Rich Corbin. And I've read a number of these, several dozen of these comics now, and I can see how they were an influence on Corbin. The storytelling is very clear and precise. And once you start reading the stories, they are engaging. Jesse Marsh is kind of like, Jesse Marsh as an artist kind of follows my favorite school of writing, which is the invisible hand. Marsh just sort of steps back and only does enough to keep the story moving. His art never gets in the way of the read. It's sort of sophisticated in a way. I know he has a lot of proponents who love his work. He has a lot of people, detractors, who hate his work. But I can see it. Not my favorite Tarzan artist or Tarzan creator or comics, but I can see the appeal, and I certainly read it. I kept reading them, so that's the test, isn't it? Another hero, jungle hero, not specifically consigned to the jungle, was Kona. Kona, the king of Monster Island. I think that's what they called it. It was a series at Dell, created for Dell, with artwork by Sam Glanzman, and the stories were wild and crazy. Some of Dell's craziest writers worked on it, and it's just a nutty series with tons and tons of action. And when I was a little kid, 6 or 7, I was just fascinated by this series. Um, it's kind of Land of the Lost, but far more violent and savage and brutal, especially for a Dell comic. And there was one issue where there was a dinosaur stampede, and it absolutely fascinated me. And as a 5 or 6 year old, I remember laying on the living room floor trying to recreate that stampede with my little plastic dinosaurs. But who wouldn't love this comic? I mean, my God, look at that cover. Look at that cover. What 6 year old kid could walk past that cover on the stands and not have to have it? There it is. He's the monarch of Monster Isle. And the stories were really trippy and somewhat psychedelic because they dealt with time and space. Monster Island was kind of ephemeral. The rules did not apply. I imagine it was inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs' Land of Time Forgot, his island of Caspak, where a lot of these elements happen, where time has no meaning. Uh, but yeah, just a great series. Not specifically a jungle series, but in the same genre. And well, I've done some jungle comics myself recently, including one called inspiringly and creatively called Jungle Comics, and it's still running. We did a crowdfunder for it, and we're still, building up to I believe what's going to be a 6 issue run, and it's been a lot of fun to work on with a lot of terrific talent contributing. And it is from Antarctic Press. You might want to look for it. As the logo says, Antarctic Press comics are cool, and they are. And I had a lot of fun. I'm still having a lot of fun. I have one more issue to write on this, and it's having fun. Both, it's sort of my True Lies version of a jungle comic. It is a true jungle comic with all the things you would expect in a jungle comic, but there's a few elements of parody here and there, a little bit of humor thrown in, poking a little bit of fun at the genre that I love. I also did Superman Tarzan with Carlos Meglia, fantastic genius artist Carlos Meglia, which was my other big foray into the jungle comics genre, which, you're correct, it's a forgotten genre, kind of left behind by time, kind of like the service comedy. Just don't see them anymore. All right, next question. Jeff Winstead. Were you surprised by the hand wringing that erupted when CrossGen announced American Power? I seem to remember one comic book news site referring to the cover to the first issue as depicting an American superhero punching a stereotypical Muslim, when it seemed pretty clear to me that he was punching bin Laden. Did the controversy create friction with other CrossGen creators, or were they supportive of the project? Well, American Power had its origins with a bleeding heart liberal, believe it or not. I didn't think of American Power. CrossGen was in trouble financially. As you can see on this cover, it is bin Laden. It is not just any Muslim. It is, the major bad guy, the Dr. Doom of Muslims. So, yeah, CrossGen was in trouble financially. Of course, we were in trouble financially most of our history, but we were really looking at the end of the road, and we needed a hit. And a lot of readers wanted us to get into the superhero genre, and which we were resisting. But Chris Orr, who was our head marketing guy and a freaking genius, I learned more from Chris Orr while I was at CrossGen than from anybody else about how comics work. I mean, and I've had great mentors. I mean, Bo Smith is a wealth of information on how comic books are sold and distributed in the direct market. But Chris Orr knew the book market. He taught me a lot. Taught me a whole lot about how books are put together, published, distributed. What works, what doesn't work, how to deal with people. Just a terrific guy, but big bleeding heart liberal. I mean, we didn't talk a lot of politics because we wanted to remain friends. But Chris is the one that came up with this idea. He says, why not have a superhero who's engaged in the war on terror? Basically update the Golden Age heroes who fought Hitler and Tojo, and have a bunch of rough and tumble, superpowered guys in masks go after our current bad guys. fanatical Islamic Wahhabi whatevers, jihadists. So obviously they came to me because, and I said, well, it would have to have a military aspect. These guys would have to be sanctioned by the military, and they would, you know, basically take the fight to the terrorists. And there would be a lot of kind of intrigue, you know, Bourne, like Jason Bourne kind of stuff, and you know, all that jazz, dealing with, you know, the government and the military, spy kind of stuff. And you know, we had our superpower Captain America guy, and we had our spy chick, and all the rest of it. And we were having a lot of fun. Now, everyone across town was behind it because we needed a hit. But I do remember one writer. He wasn't an on-site writer. He was a writer that we hired uh, freelance on a freelance basis, and he quit. He quit CrossGen. He wouldn't work for CrossGen anymore because of this title. I don't, you know, quite understand. I guess he chose his sides. I, or either that, or it just, you know, he couldn't handle the material. Um, and so, yeah, we did it, and it was a lot of fun to work on. And I worked on a premiere issue, which was going to be a free comic book day, a 22-page, brand new free comic book, which essentially was going to be American Power #1. And I also wrote the 32-page complete first issue, official first issue. Now, the thing about this was that it was canceled because of political pressure. We were hearing from everybody. And Mark Alessi at CrossGen bowed to political pressure. And I didn't know Mark's politics at the time. I learned later that he was every bit as conservative as I was. But we never talked politics while I was at CrossGen. It never came up. And I didn't have any idea where he stood one way or the other. And to me, the war on terror wasn't about politics anyway. We were at war. To me, politics ends at the border, you know, at the ocean's edge, as they say. But anyway, he bowed to pressure from damn near everybody, which was a shame because even though it was going to be a free comic book, now I don't know if you know this or not, but free comic books are not given away necessarily. They are sold to the retailer. And at this time, free comic books were sold to the retailer at 19 cents a piece. So thank your retailer when he gives you a free comic book, because it wasn't free for him. He had to pay for it. They were 19 cents a piece for a 22-page brand new comic. Okay. The irony here is it was going to be our best-selling comic ever. It was going to be our biggest launch. We had pre-orders for like 500,000 copies of this thing. CrossGen's first superhero, a #1 issue of a superhero comic. Yeah, we had 500,000 copies. We did a free comic book day comic that was actually going to be the most profitable comic that CrossGen had ever produced. It was going to launch at nearly 10 times the amount of our biggest launch, which was El Cazador. El Cazador launched at about 55,000 copies. This was going to launch at close to 500,000 copies. So the public wanted it. It was going to be a hit, which is a real shame. We canceled it. We canceled what would have been our biggest title to political pressure. The lesson here is never bow to political pressure, and never assume that the people behind the work are of one political persuasion or another. There really wasn't going to be any politics in American Power. It's just a bunch of weenies who didn't approve of military action against our nation's enemies, which I can't get my head around. I'm sorry. And Chris Orr, bleeding heart liberal like he was, he couldn't get his head around either. Now, he was shocked and aghast and appalled at a lot of the stuff I did in the comic, but he encouraged me to do more. I mean, he liked the fact that it made him appalled because that's what we were going for. And we succeeded too well. We did our jobs too well. Hey, I promised in an earlier segment that if I could think of other stupid things people had said to me over the years, I would present them. And here's a winner. No successful movie has ever had a sad ending. I was involved in a project. I was adapting to a graphic novel, a movie treatment, and I was working with the son of a true Hollywood mogul. Unfortunately, he has 2 sons, and I was working with the dumber of the 2. Well, actually, the other son is quite talented. This guy was not. He had come up with either he or a writer that he had met had come up with a high concept idea for an action thriller, and I'm adapting into a graphic novel, and it's pretty lame stuff. Think of a globe-trotting adventure from the '90s starring Ashley Judd and Morgan Freeman, and you probably you've seen the movie. Uh, no, it never got made, but you've seen this movie, even though it never got made. And while we in one of our many conference calls, maddening conference calls, I suggested that this film was a piece of crap. The idea was a piece of crap, but could be vastly improved. Actually, turned into a decent movie if it had a downer ending. And that's when the producer said, "No successful movie has ever had a sad ending." Well, I don't know. Maybe he's right. I can't think of one. Can you think of a movie that was great and successful and had a sad ending? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, all sarcasm aside, obviously he couldn't have been more wrong. A lot of great films, both Hollywood and international films, uh, you know, ended on a sad note, a downer note, and this made them memorable. Now I understand that he was just making, escapist summer blockbuster crap, but still, why not elevate the story? Uh, and the story definitely would have worked a whole lot better with a downer ending. Probably would have had repeat viewership. Certainly would have had more of an emotional impact if the ending was not, happy, happy, everything's okay now. Um, it involved a global threat that we could all relate to. It was about a pandemic. We can even relate to it more now. I mean, hell, imagine the millions that you make now in streaming just because of the subject matter. But he was convinced that everything had to work out at the end, or audiences would go away unhappy, which any thinking person understands simply isn't true. Um, and you'll run into this a lot in Hollywood. I mean, I've run into so many guys who wrote like straight to video action films, and every time they suggested an improvement to the story, the producers would rail against actually better writing or, or the creation of a better story, and they would just fight. No, we're not creating art here. It's a famous story when John Dahl was making the movie The Last Seduction, that he had to promise Cinemax that he had no pretenses to art. But he did, and he made a great movie, much, much better than any Cinemax movie should have ever been. Check it out sometime. Last Seduction, Linda Fiorentino and Bill Pullman. Great modern film noir. Anyway, yeah, there's your stupid quote. No good movies ever had sad endings. So let's, and if I think of more stupid things, and I'm sure I will post them, continue to post them. Next question, Glenn Davis. How does a movie option on your property actually work? Well, how it works is, some producer generally sees your comic book or novel or whatever the hell it is you've done, and they want to option it. And an option is usually, well, back in the 80s, when they were throwing around options, like bread to the starving multitudes, they were offering about like $2,000, $3,000, and they would option you for a year, and they would tie up your property all that time. And sometimes that was the point. They would tie your property up. They would spend the 2 or 3 grand just to get it and hold on to it so no one else could get it. And it was a pretty crappy system. I had a number of properties that I optioned several times. I mean, I did a book called Radio Boy in the 80s, a one-shot satire on manga, and I optioned it 2 times to Rankin and Bass. Which is weird because it was a satire on manga, and here the Rankin and Bass, who had so much of their animation done in Japan, they optioned it. I don't think they ever quite understood that it was a parody, but and I optioned other stuff, and it's generally a bad deal. And I don't option stuff anymore unless the numbers are higher, because at $2,000 or $3,000, basically what a Hollywood producer spends for lunch every week, they get you cheap. And your comic book guys, and I've actually had producers say to me, well, you're a comic book guy, you'll go for the low money. you need the money. And there were times when I did, and there were times when I didn't. There were times when I could just say, go to hell. I don't need your money. I'm doing great here in comics. So, I do have a property currently under option, but it was for considerably more money than they used to offer. They had to make me a decent offer to allow the property to be tied up. One time, a producer, and a good guy, very, very successful television producer, he wanted to do a feature film based on one of my properties. It was Law Dog. And he asked if he could have an option. And he offered me $2,000. And I said, well, for a year. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll option it to you until Monday for $1. And he says, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, look, correct me if I'm wrong, but you got a friend that you went to film school with, and now he's at Warner's or Paramount or one of the other studios, and you're going to have lunch with him later this week, and you'll bring this up. And if he says no, it's no. And that's it. And you're really not going to do anything else with it, but you're going to tie me up for 6 months to a year, and I can't sell it to anybody else. I said, so I'll let you have it till Monday. I said, correct me if I'm wrong. And to his credit, he laughed, and he said, no, you're right. That's pretty much the scenario. I have a guy I want to show it to that I know. So, so we did that, and he paid me $1. So that's optioning. That's what optioning is all about. You don't want to option. You want to sell the film rights outright, and you want to get the big money, and you want to keep your own rights. I mean, on my most recent property that I optioned, the studio wanted everything. They wanted comic book rights. They wanted publication rights, and no, all they got was movie or TV, and they got nothing else. So stand your ground, because you don't want to say, oh well, I'll have this money in hand today, and then be sitting crying 6 months from now when basically they've taken your property and they're making millions off it in other media, and you didn't get anything for that. And you relinquished all control over the thing you created. Don't give it all away. Yeah, if they make a movie, they make a crappy movie, but don't let them take away your ability to do further comics or further novels or whatever medium that you originally created it in. Stand your ground. You will not be sorry. Next question. James Mealy said, do you think it's possible to do an entertaining and engaging story while being overtly politically divisive in it? Or does doing that really ruin the fun and entertainment value of the story? Well, my favorite example of this is Green Lantern, Green Arrow. When they tried to pump up sales of Green Lantern by making it relevant, relevant, air quotes, relevant, they got the attention of the New York Times, because they were dealing with the issues of the day, like population explosion. Remember when the population exploded? Yeah. So they got a lot of attention from outside media. They didn't get any sales. Green Lantern sales crashed. It was their lowest selling title. I mean, Jonah Hex was their #1 selling title at the time. And, having Speedy get addicted to drugs did not help. People who read superhero comics did not want to read about this stuff. They didn't want to see Spiro Agnew on the cover of their comic book. So, scenes like this, while it got them the attention of the New York Times and Time Magazine and people like that, it didn't translate into readership. It was not what readers wanted, which was escapist entertainment. Now, you can have, you can deal with political stuff. Let me use this as an example here. Okay, you've got Mad Magazine and you've got National Lampoon. Okay, 2 different magazines that had comics and stories, and they were parody magazines, they were satire magazines, they were humor magazines, but there's a difference between the two. National Lampoon was, created by a bunch of Harvard guys, a lot of the same talent pool that came up with The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live. Basically the comedy that we see today was created by the magazine National Lampoon. And Lampoon dealt with, mockery of contemporary life and parodies of TV and like Mad Magazine, TV and comics and all the rest of it. And they dealt with politics. But the difference, or the main feature, the defining feature of National Lampoon was that they were fair. They mocked everybody. They were about mocking the establishment, hypocrisy, and it didn't matter if they were Democrats or Republicans, or they were left wing or they were right wing. They went after everybody. If it was funny, they went after you. They had far left writers and artists. They had far right writers and artists. And everybody was up for grabs, as should be. I mean, they made fun of, liberal icons like Norman Mailer. And look at this, it's Norman the Barbarian, and it's drawn by Barry Smith, the Conan artist at the time. They were really into comics at National Lampoon. I mean, they knew good stuff from bad stuff and hired some of the top talent in the business to work on these parodies. And then the most infamous parody they did was they made fun of this famous Volkswagen ad that showed that a Volkswagen would float. I remember the TV ad. A Volkswagen will not float indefinitely, but a Volkswagen will definitely float. And they made fun of it. If Teddy Kennedy drove a Volkswagen, he'd be president today. A direct reference to the Chappaquiddick incident that cost Ted Kennedy the presidential nomination in 1972. So, or 68, one or the other. So just, thank God Ted Kennedy never became president. So, but anyway, that's what the Lampoon was about. Going after hypocrisy, going after the powerful, making fun of anybody that was worthy of their derision. And that's how Mad Magazine started out as well. Mad Magazine made fun of, pop culture and contemporary American life. But they were always fair. This famous 1960 cover, which was a flip cover. On one side of the cover, they were supporting John Kennedy, and on the other side of the cover, they were supporting Richard Nixon. And the newsstand, whoever ran the newsstand could flip the magazine either way. So basically, they were having it both ways, making fun of both sides. And that's kind of what Mad did. The Kennedys were up for grabs, as well as Nixon. And there was a playful aspect to it. It wasn't mean, and it didn't take sides. Because they understood they wanted to maintain a general readership. They wanted everybody to think this stuff was funny. And I mean, believe it or not, at the tender age of 10 years old, I was a huge Barry Goldwater supporter. I was out there at 10 putting up yard signs and sticking bumper stickers on cars and everything else. And they did this little satire on Barry Goldwater as a kid who blows up his own neighborhood with a toy gun. And when I was a kid, I thought this was hysterical. Now, I was a supporter of Barry Goldwater. I still thought it was funny, okay, because it wasn't mean or anything else. It was just funny. It was just done for laughs. But things changed over time. And toward the end of the late 60s, Mad took sides. They basically, until their demise, were supporters of the Democrat Party. And, this stuff wasn't funny anymore. It was just mean. And that's not fun. So, yeah, this is a little bit of a departure from comics, but is it really? Because both Mad and National Lampoon use comics as a medium. And they are examples of how you can use politics in comics and how you shouldn't. Now, before anybody says, but Chuck, you've done political books. Yeah, but they never had superheroes in them. I never had Batman or, Conan or anybody else spout my political beliefs coming out of their mouths. I never had an agenda. I dealt with issues in books like Robin and Green Arrow, but I never told the reader what to think about them. I never took a side. The issues were presented because they were contemporary and relatable and led to stories. They created conflict inside the story. So that's the only reason that I ever dealt with anything even vaguely political when I was at DC and Marvel. Now, yeah, I've done political books, but they were political books. Clinton Cash, Forgotten Man, Trump Space Force. These are political books, and they don't apologize. They present, I don't know so much Trump Space Force, it's a parody, but the other two present a point of view, a conservative point of view, but that's kind of known from the beginning. I'm not trying to trick anybody. I'm not trying to fool anybody. I'm not trying to mask a political piece by as entertainment. You know, there's no jiggery pokery here, as Antonin Scalia might have said. So anyway, Unauthorized TV. It's a subscription service. Yeah, you got to pay to hear me talk about stuff, but I go into much, much more depth there than I can do here on these YouTube videos. And as much as I love doing these, all I get is love, no money. But if you want to see and hear more of me, I'm not sure why you would, but if you did, you can go to Unauthorized TV, check it out. It's a terrific channel. There's a lot of humor there, instructional videos, all kinds of interesting stuff. That's free speech. It can never be censored. It can never be demonetized because Unauthorized TV is its own host. And everything goes there. It's the Wild West of internet video, unlike YouTube. There's no gatekeepers, there's no control, and you can do and say as you wish. So I encourage you, if you are of a mind to encourage free speech, to at least go over and check out a few of the free videos and see if you might want to sign up. So that's it for me. I will see you here either next week or the week after. Keep spreading the word, and I will see all of you down the road.